Welcome to math class. We are continuing on in the Math Makes Sense 9 textbook. We are continuing on in chapter 3. We're looking at chapter 3.3, which is subtracting rational numbers. We looked at how to add them last time. Now we're going to be looking at how do we subtract rational numbers. So the first thing we're going to look at is the example at the start of the chapter. Where here they have a number of stock prices. Okay. Now, before we get going too far, we want to know what stock is. Right? So basically, what happens is stock is something that it's basically a piece of paper. What that piece of paper says is that you own a small piece of a company. Right? So this is my piece of paper. So I own that much. Now, there might be other people who own these chunks, and the business itself is probably going to own a big chunk so that they get to control their own direction. But that's stuff for later in the future. Stock prices can go up or down. So at some point, you might start a day where you have a stock that's worth $1. And then, for whatever reason, because people think your business is really good or it's really valuable or something, many more people will start buying and selling shares, and that means that your share is more valuable. And by the end of the day, let's say you've got $1.50 per share. Now, if you only have one share, that sucks. You just made 50 cents, potentially. But if you have thousands of shares, now that means every time that stock price goes up, for every one of those shares, you get 50 cents. So you just made, if you had 1,000 shares, you just made $500. And so that's how shares work. So in the example that they're looking at right here, what they want you to do is figure out whether or not these shares made or lost money. So we've got the stock price at the end of the day, 4.670 minus at the start of the day 4.710. You'll notice as you punch this into a calculator that your number is going to come with a negative sign, 0.04. Okay, same. So the question is, why is it a negative and what does it represent in the real world? Well, what it represents is that if we go back to that same $1 stock, this stock went down minus 0.4, and that stock now is worth $0.96 because it went down 4 cents. Okay? So that's how, that's what the negative is meant to represent in those types of questions. So let's go ahead and look at some of these other ones. Okay, so we're going to go with, oh, I missed some over here. Okay, so let's look at our third one down. So we've got 64.840 minus 65.970. Now, right off the bat, I know because my second number is actually bigger than my first number, I know that this is going to be a negative. And that's just, once you do math for a while, you start to recognize those patterns. So I know that if my first number is smaller, it's actually going to wind up, or sorry, my final answer is actually going to wind up as a negative. So I have 64.840 minus 65.970 gives me an answer of negative 1.13. So each one of those stocks went down $1.13. Let's do a little bit of just an experiment here to show you how this works. Let's pretend for a second that Bob has 500 shares in the Canadian Tire Corporation. So if he has 500 shares, I'm going to go 500 times negative 1.13. And what we find out there is that he lost 32,900. Oh, let me make sure that's not correct. Something went screwy in my calculator. So 1.13 times 500 is going to give me negative 565. Not sure where I got that 32,000 from. Crazy calculator. Okay, so I just lost $565. Now, stock markets are very volatile. They might go up one day, down the next, up a couple days in a row, so on and so forth. So people aren't freaking out too much, but it's good to understand exactly how stocks work for those questions they're going to ask you how it works. So our next example, and this is into a little bit more of the nuts and bolts of how do we actually deal with adding and subtracting numbers. So you'll notice that we've got something a little bit unique going on here. We have 5 minus negative 3 equals, and they didn't actually leave us, or they didn't show us where it finishes up on the end of the number line. Now, compare this. 5 minus 3 is going to equal 2. Hopefully all of us have been doing that since grade 1 or 2. Minusing a negative cannot give me the same answer because the numbers are not the same. So I can't get the same answer. Now, without getting, we can go into the theory of it another day, but the basic rule is anytime you are minusing a negative, it winds up becoming a positive. So what I actually have is 5 plus 3, which equals 8. Okay? So anytime I'm minusing a negative, it actually winds up being a positive, or I'm adding. Okay? If I'm minusing a negative, I'm actually adding things on. Okay, so that's the basic idea of how that works. So now let's look at the slightly more complicated examples of how this is going to work, especially once we're dealing with fractions. So the first thing I have to do with fractions is I have to get my denominators the same. Okay, now I know that 3 goes into 6 2 times, so I'm going to multiply everything over here by 2. All right. Remembering that whatever I do to the bottom of an equation, I have to do to the top. So I get 5 over 6 minus 8 over 6. Yeah. Since my lower numbers are now the same, all I have to do is deal with my top numbers. So here I have 5 minus 8. Well, if I draw a quick number line, I get 0 in the middle. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So if I start at 5, I'm now moving down 8 steps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Which leaves me with negative 3. So that's how we deal with those. That's how we deal with fractions when our denominators are not the same. So remember, with adding and subtracting, I have to make sure that my numbers on the bottom are the same. My denominators are the same. Okay, so let's look at the next example. All right, same thing. I need to get these numbers the same. So I'm actually going to have to change both of them. I know that 4 and 5 both go into 20, so I'm actually going to multiply this one by 5 and this one by 4. Sorry, 4. But I'm only multiplying the fraction. I'm not multiplying the whole number. So I get negative 25 over 20 minus negative 3 and 4 over 20. Okay. Now in order to make this number a little bit easier to work with, I'm actually going to convert this into an improper fraction. So I have minus 25 over 20 minus negative 3 times 20 plus 4 gives me 64, negative 64. That's not a 4. Okay. Negative 64 over 20. There we go. Now, knowing what we know again, now that both of my denominators are the same, all I have to do is deal with my equation across the top half. So I have negative 25 minus negative 64. This is going to be a hard one to demonstrate on the number line. Okay. So I'm not going to worry about it too much. But I know that negative 25 minus a negative, so this is going to become a positive. So I actually have negative 25 plus 64. Okay. Negative, sorry about that, negative 25 plus 64, which is going to equal, let me pull my calculator out really quick, because the one on the screen isn't working. So negative 25 plus 64 equals 39. Okay. So there's a couple steps involved there, but it's not super crazy or super hard. Okay, so now what do we do if we've got a word problem or we have to deal with decimals? We don't have any fractions here, we've got decimals. Okay, so a diver jumps off a cliff that's 14.7 meters above sea level. After hitting the water, he plunges 3.8 meters below the surface of the water before returning to the surface. A. They want to represent the difference in heights from the top of the cliff to the bottom of his dive. So I want to sketch a number line. So I have a number line. 0 is going to be my sea level. Yeah. Everything is above or below sea level, so I'm going to use that as my 0. Now his jumping off point is way over here, 14.7. Okay. He plunges 3.8 meters below the surface. So there's a negative 3.8 meters. All right, I'll put meters here too. So our numbers are going to be positive 14.7 meters and negative 3.8 meters. That's how I answer A. B is a little bit different. So what they want to know is, what is the distance from the ocean floor to the bottom of the dive? So I know that my ocean floor is negative 5.6 meters, okay, because it's deep, below sea level. Okay. I also know that my diver, so I need to find the difference, so I'm going to be subtracting. My diver went negative 3.8 meters below the surface of the water. So there I have my difference equation. So I'm going to have negative 5.6. If I'm minusing a negative, I'm actually adding. So I get plus 3.8 equals, and I'm left with negative 1.8 meters. That's for B. So the difference between, the distance from the ocean floor to the bottom of his dive would have been negative 1.8 meters. Okay, so that is how we deal with subtracting rational numbers, both fractions and decimals. Alrighty, see you in class.